Good morning, Wabash. Giving today's chapel talk is Professor Scott Himsel. Professor Himsel graduated with his bachelor's degree from Wabash and his law degree from Northwestern University. He teaches and advises pre-law students here at Wabash and also practices law. He helps oversees Wabash's pre-law program, including an annual moot court competition, prepares students for the LSAT, sets up law school visits, and organizes the annual Peck Lecture. Himsel has practiced law for over 20 years at Baker & Daniels in Indianapolis. His law practice focuses on clients that serve students, including colleges, universities, sororities, fraternities, and religious organizations. His wife, Jane Ann, a fellow Northwestern University law graduate, practices employment law in Indianapolis at Littler Mendelsohn. Professor Himsel and Jane Ann share a strong interest in how law and religion intersect. They attend North United Methodist Church. Scott loves opera, classical music, swimming, running, and reading biographies. Giving his chapel talk titled Secrets and Lies, Should the Government Have a Record of Every Phone Call We Make, Professor Scott Himsel.
Our story begins in March of this year. The place was the U.S. Senate Intelligence Committee. The witness was James Clapper, Director of National Intelligence, who oversees all the spying that our government does, including the National Security Agency, the NSA. The questioner was Senator Ron Wyden, a liberal Democrat of Oregon. Here is how that questioning went. Senator Wyden, give me a yes or no answer to the question. Does the NSA collect any type of data at all on millions or hundreds of millions of Americans? Director Clapper, no, sir. Senator Wyden, it does not. Director Clapper, not wittingly. There are cases where they could inadvertently perhaps collect, but not wittingly. Odd choice of words. But nevertheless, what Director Clapper was saying was pretty clear. He said the NSA does not collect data about millions or hundreds of millions of Americans, but could perhaps collect some data unintentionally. The problem with that answer is it was a lie. We learned it was a lie 2 months later, in May of 2013, when former NSA computer specialist Edward Snowden leaked to the newspapers information about a secret NSA program that requires telephone providers like Verizon to turn over information about every telephone call made in the United States. The NSA calls that information metadata. The media and Congress expressed outrage and shock that the Obama administration was keeping records on every phone call Americans make. One congressman who helped draft the Patriot Act said this kind of spying was far beyond what Congress intended. Really? Congress was shocked? Well, remember how specific Senator Wyden's question was? How he specifically used the word data? And how he asked whether the NSA was collecting it from millions or hundreds of millions of Americans? If it's starting to seem to you like Senator Wyden knew the answer to his question before he asked it, you would be right. In truth, Congress had no reason to be shocked. Both the House and the Senate Intelligence Committees, we now know, had already known about the NSA telephone program for 4 years prior to Mr. Snowden's disclosure. Those committees, in turn, had made that same information available to all members of Congress. And after all members of Congress had access to the information, Congress reauthorized the NSA telephone program twice. So, like Director Clapper in the executive branch, members of the legislative branch also lied about the NSA program. Now, you might wonder whether the third and final branch of our federal government, the judicial branch, had any role. After all, you have to have a warrant before you conduct surveillance, especially on a citizen, right? So, did a court approve this NSA program? Well, yes and no. I mean, it calls itself a court. But no, it doesn't really resemble an American court in many respects. For example, courts hear evidence from both sides before deciding a case. But not this court, not the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court, also known as the FISA Court. Not the FISA Court. The FISA Court hears from only one side, the government. Also, either the voters or an elected official appoints or elects the judge, right? But not the FISA Court. An unelected official, the Chief Justice of the U.S. Supreme Court, appoints all the members of the FISA Court. Finally, in this country at least, court proceedings and rulings are open to the public, but not the FISA Court. It keeps its proceedings and even its rulings secret. Indeed, one of the documents that Mr. Snowden leaked before he fled the country for Russia was a FISA court opinion that the NSA's collection of information about every phone call we make doesn't violate our constitutional rights. So, let's put it all together. How did we get to the point where our government is keeping a record of every phone call we made in the last 7 years? Answer: the executive branch created a secret program subject only to secret review by the Congress and an order of a secret court. I think we can agree that this is no way to run a democracy, through secrets, lies, and leaks. But the intense anger expressed this summer, while certainly justified, has at times produced more heat than light. We know that some secrecy is necessary, indeed essential, to our security. More specifically, we know that we should not disclose to our adversaries how we are spying on them. But Director Clapper's and Congress's lies make it hard to trust our government with secrecy, especially when they use a program that was supposed to collect foreign intelligence to collect intelligence on every American who uses a telephone. How did that happen? And is there a way to conduct the surveillance we need while also rebuilding trust in our government? I think this is where the liberal arts can help us. And I'm thinking in particular about our knowledge of history and political science, the power of excellent research and writing, and our study of technology. First, a word about history and political science. Last semester, I taught a legal history course with Dr. Murillo of our history department. One day, a student shot off the often repeated line that in America, and increasingly in other countries, our greatest concern is to preserve liberty. Dr. Murillo disagreed. He disagreed with a lot of what people said, but he disagreed, suggesting instead that security, and not liberty, is usually our greatest concern. When he said that, I was reminded that Alexander Hamilton had expressed the same concern in the Federalist Papers, and here is what Hamilton said: "Safety from external danger is the most powerful director of national conduct. Even the ardent love of liberty will, after a time, give way to its dictates. The violent destruction of life and property incident to war, the continual effort and alarm attendant to a state of continual danger, will compel nations the most attached to liberty to resort for repose and security to institutions which have a tendency to destroy their civil and political rights. To be more safe, they at length become willing to run the risk of being less free. Wow. Here's a great example of why the Federalist Papers are liberal arts classics. Writings make their way into the liberal arts canon because they have endured, by which I mean they've helped generations understand their world and analyze its ever-changing problems. Note how Hamilton's remarks help us do just that. The violent destruction of life and property incident to our war on terror causes us to have continual alarm about the danger of terrorism that arrived on our shores on 9/11. Last year's Boston Marathon bombing and the recently concluded and horrific terrorist incident in Nairobi are only the most recent reminders. Again, to paraphrase Hamilton, the continual terrorist danger has caused even this nation, which at least views itself as among the most attached to liberty, to resort to institutions which have a tendency to destroy our civil and political rights, namely secret programs, secretly approved by Congress, and a secret court to spy on all of us all the time. Now, at this point, you might say, hey, wait a minute. We are talking about the same political institutions that Hamilton himself helped design: the president, the Congress, the courts, which preserve liberty by checking and balancing each other. But this summer's eruption over Mr. Snowden's leaks proves that description is incomplete. It leaves out another powerful check and balance that Hamilton and the other framers of our Constitution provided: our freedom of speech and our freedom of the press. And this, again, I think, takes us back to the liberal arts, in particular, the power of excellent research and writing. Writers at the New York Times, the Washington Post, and especially the New Yorker, a magazine that publishes a wide array of fiction and nonfiction, have shined a bright light on the once secret FISA court. And here's what they found. In the past, 2 Republican prior Chief Justices appointed 1/3 of the FISA court judges from the Democratic Party, but not the current Chief Justice. The current Republican Chief Justice, John Roberts, has appointed 11 Republicans and 1 Democrat. Also, over half of Chief Justice Roberts' appointees previously served as prosecutors. Since 2001, the FISA court granted 19,930 requests for surveillance orders and denied 11. This has given the government a 99.4% success rate in the FISA court. Not surprisingly, after sharing this data, these authors have exposed and come up with numerous suggestions for reforming the FISA court. These reforms include having the president appoint the FISA judges, subject to congressional approval. God, that sounds familiar. Appointing a full-time advocate to argue against the government's position, so that the FISA court hears both sides of the issue, and requiring the FISA court to release the legal reasoning behind its opinions while keeping secret the information in those opinions about suspected terrorists. You see, researching and writing well matters. It can change our democracy. Indeed, following one of the writer's suggestions, the FISA court, on its own accord, released one of its rulings about the telephone program just last Tuesday. I read it immediately. That ruling, like the one Mr. Snowden released this summer, concluded that our Constitution does not prevent the NSA from having a record of every telephone call we make. These legal opinions are a puzzle in need of a liberal arts analysis using our knowledge of the social sciences, the humanities, and technology. Now, as I've mentioned, this NSA program collects information about every phone call. What do I mean? Under this program, the NSA does not get the content of our calls. Rather, providers like Verizon, turn over to the government the following: the name of the caller, the number of each person he or she called, and the date, time, and duration of each call. The FISA court ruled that we as citizens have no reasonable expectation of privacy in that information. This is an important question, because if we have no reasonable expectation of privacy in the people we call, we probably have no reasonable expectation of privacy in the internet sites we visit either. How did the FISA court reach the conclusion that we have no reasonable expectation of privacy? Well, the difference is now we actually know, because the opinions are no longer secret. It did so by applying a 30-year-old case about rotary telephones. A rotary telephone is a phone. I'm from the past. A rotary telephone, as the name implies, has a dial, and there's a hole cut out for each number, and you actually dial the phone. Now, a question to our undergraduate friends who are here today. Except when you were visiting a foreign country, how many of you have used a rotary telephone? That's more than I expected. Okay. So that's the basis on which the FISA court decided this case. In that 1979 rotary telephone case, the government, acting without a warrant, got a telephone company to put what was called a pen register on the phone line of a person suspected of making harassing phone calls. The pen register recorded only the numbers dialed and not the content of any call. The U.S. Supreme Court ruled that because the defendant had disclosed those numbers to the phone company in order to make the call, he no longer had any reasonable expectation of privacy in those numbers, allowing the phone company in turn to turn them over to the police without a warrant. 3 justices disagreed. They argued that because the numbers one dials reveals the identities of the persons and places called, they could expose intimate details of a person's life. They wrote, and I quote, "Privacy is not a discrete commodity, possessed absolutely or not at all. Those who disclose certain facts to a bank or phone company for a limited business purpose need not assume that this information will be released to other persons or for other purposes, including the police. And unless the person is prepared to forego use of what for many has become a personal and professional necessity, the telephone, he cannot help but accept the risk of surveillance." Interesting. Of course, this concern is far greater today than it was when the court decided the rotary telephone case in 1979. As a matter of personal or professional necessity, we disclose far more than telephone numbers to our service providers to use our smartphones and the internet. Just last year, in 2012, the U.S. Supreme Court decided a case involving GPS devices. And in that case, Justice Samuel Alito, a Republican, like the secret FISA court, assumed that the court's 1979 rotary telephone case would still apply today. He reasoned that by turning over a wealth of information about themselves on the internet, the American people are signaling that they are willing to forego their privacy in order to gain all of the great technological benefits of smartphones and the internet. But Justice Sonia Sotomayor rejected that argument and called upon the court to take a different approach. Listen to what she says. "This approach is ill-suited to the digital age, in which people reveal a great deal of information about themselves to third parties in the course of carrying out mundane tasks. People disclose the phone numbers that they dial or text to their cellular providers, the URLs that they visit, and the email addresses with which they correspond to their internet service providers, and the books, groceries, and medications they purchase to online retailers. Perhaps, as Justice Alito notes, some people may find the trade-off of privacy for convenience worthwhile, or come to accept this diminution of privacy as inevitable. And perhaps not. I, for one, doubt that people would accept without complaint the warrantless disclosure to the government of a list of every website they had visited in the last week, month, or year. Some legal scholars believe that what I just read to you is the teeing up of what will become the key privacy debate in our courts for the next decade. But here's the catch. Even though the Supreme Court debated these issues based on the most recent technology just 1 year ago, the FISA court, in its opinion last week, didn't even mention this U.S. Supreme Court opinion, relying instead on a 1979 case about rotary telephones. Well, although the FISA court never engaged the issue, I'm curious. What do you think? Should we lose our right to privacy in who we call and which sites we visit because we had to turn that information over to our internet service providers? And again, should the government have a record of every call we make? Well, there's always another side to the story, and it's the Obama administration's counterargument, and here it goes. The administration accesses only a very small part of this massive telephone metadata that it collects. Here's how it works. The government accesses it at only two levels. First, it looks at calls made directly with a number it has associated with a suspected terrorist. Second, it looks at anyone who had a call with a person who communicated directly with a suspected terrorist. And the government never hears the content of any call until and unless it has first linked the American caller with a foreign terrorist by that means. The president has explained that finding a foreign terrorist contacts in this country, his sleeper cell, if you will, is like finding a needle in a haystack. The administration has explained that it has to create its own haystack of data to find that needle. The administration argues that it can more quickly determine a foreign terrorist contacts in the United States by assembling its own database of all the calls, all of them made in this country. And as an example, the Obama administration says that it disrupted an attack on the New York City subway system by creating its own haystack. But now that they know about the NSA program and how it works, some of these journalists and other commentators are suggesting another approach. They suggest that Congress require the private service providers like Verizon and AT&T to maintain their data in a format the government could quickly access. That way, the government would only have your call information if you had made a call with a person identified as a foreign terrorist or someone who had been in touch with them, rather than the government now having information about every call that every American makes. In other words, rather than to create its own haystack, Congress could order the private sector to maintain their own haystacks and permit the government to search them. The Obama administration, of course, has a counter-argument to that, has said that the proposed solution may not work because data can disappear when providers exit this fluid telecom market, that glitches often occur when searching data on one system, let alone multiple systems, and that we cannot afford the time it takes to sort all of that out as we seek to stop imminent terrorist attacks. After all, the president has said, at this point, all we're doing is looking at the phone numbers. And so again, I ask you, how would you decide this? You see, I think it's very important that we get this right. But to me, what is far more important is that we are now approaching this question using more of a liberal arts approach. Secrets, lies, and leaks are not good ways to make policy. And we must keep some things secret, but we should not keep secret how our courts are ruling on our constitutional rights. So in a liberal arts tradition, we have now exposed our legal reasoning to public scrutiny. And in doing so, we have now enabled our citizens to engage in the kind of critical thinking and careful analysis that this vexing problem of international terrorism demands, the kind of thinking and analysis that might help us set a better balance between liberty and security. While I don't yet know how this debate will end, there's one thing I can promise you. At Wabash, we will never decide these questions for you. Rather, the liberal arts is about giving you the tools that will help you decide for yourselves. Our job is merely to set the table and invite you to come and debate and decide these issues using those liberal arts texts and techniques that have endured. Besides, giving you the answers to today's questions would do you very little good in the long run. Like the framers of our Constitution, we cannot foresee the issues you will face in the future. When I graduated from Wabash in 1985, we did not foresee 9/11, smartphones, or the internet. Indeed, when I graduated, Al Gore had not yet invented the internet. I take shots at everybody. But what we can do as a community is learn the key lessons and techniques of the social sciences, the humanities, and the physical sciences, those liberal arts lessons and techniques that have endured because they've helped people face new and unexpected challenges. So while I will not presume to answer these questions for you, I do suggest that you reach your own conclusions using the liberal arts approach. And after the beating that it took this summer, I hope our government will do the same.
Okay, just a few quick announcements. TGIF this week will be at Teak at 6 p.m. Tennis is competing this weekend at the ITA Central Regional Competition in Kalamazoo. Football will compete in its first away game, traveling to Allegheny. Soccer will be at Hiram. It's also a reminder that the Muffy Drive will take place next Monday, where we will be competing against DePaul to see who can raise the most money. Also, the Sphinx Club will continue its 4-part presidential presentations with the lives and the impacts of presidents number 4 through 8, Monday at 8:30. Also, if you received a W in last week's chapel sing competition, you can meet outside afterwards to try to get rid of your W. Please rise and sing Old Wabash.